Hey, Heather.
Yes, Amy.
Did you know that approximately 1 billion plastic toothbrushes end up in U.S. landfills every year?
That's a lot of plastic.
It sure is. Now, if you're like Heather and me, you're always looking for easy ways to reduce your carbon footprint. And when I say easy, I'm not kidding. Here's one of the easiest ways I know. Just switch to a biodegradable toothbrush. Earthmania bamboo toothbrushes are made from premium, biodegradable, and highly sustainable bamboo with densely packed, ultra-soft, BPA-free bristles. So they're safe for everyone, including kids and people with sensitive gums.
With Earthmania, you get a fantastic clean for your entire mouth, and you can feel good about helping out the environment. They come in a 4-pack biodegradable cardboard box, not plastic packaging like most toothbrushes. And just like an old school plastic toothbrush, you should switch out your Earthmania bamboo toothbrush every 3 months. So a 4-pack box will last you an entire year.
Also, did you know that bamboo is naturally antimicrobial? So a bamboo brush is less likely to harbor germs and mold like their plastic counterparts.
I'm sold. I can't think of a reason not to switch to Earthmania.
Same. And for our Casting Notice listeners, Earthmania has a deal. And who doesn't love a deal?
I love a deal.
Yeah, go to earthmania.com and enter the code Casting Notice at checkout for 20% off your entire order. That's www.earthmania.com, discount code, which is 2 words, Casting Notice.
Earthmania premium bamboo toothbrushes. Love the earth, love your smile. Hey everyone, it's me, Heather. I have to apologize before this week's episode. Angela Tucker is an incredible writer and wrote a fantastic book about transracial adoption. You should be grateful. And I'm going to be honest, I fangirled out. I fangirled out real hard, and thankfully Amy was there to bring me right back where I needed to be, but I got pretty excited at the beginning of this interview. So please accept my apology. You'll see, Angela's amazing, and once you hear her interview, you're going to fangirl out too. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Casting Notice podcast. It's me, Heather.
And it's me, Amy.
And we have a guest I'm so excited to talk to. I read her book that Amy recommended to me. It's called You Should Be Grateful, Stories of Race, Identity, and Transracial Adoption. And I'd like to welcome Angela Tucker to our podcast. Hello, Angela.
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yay.
We are so thankful that you're here. I've read a lot of books about transracial identity, adoption, multiculturalism, and this is one of the few books I've been so excited about. I have to just first say you wrote it with such vulnerability and honesty. It's a beautiful book to read.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I love that. I've been trying to read a lot of memoirs over the last year or so, and I love that you just posted a little. I think it was on your Instagram stories recently, like, where would you shelve my book? Under what was it, Black authors, under memoir, or what was the other one? Or
social justice commentary, or I forget the other, but it was very American fiction feeling.
You said memoir or Black.
I went into the store and I was like, oh, parenting. People who shelve it under parenting, which doesn't feel quite right, but yeah.
To me, it mostly felt memoir. That's why I picked it up, because I thought it was a memoir, and I'm like, oh, this is like memoir plus.
Yeah, it was very. It's such a good read. I highly recommend it. And I'm just gonna kind of just start in, since I flagged my book.
Get it, girl. Do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the first things that I loved is that you quoted from like Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, which is one of my favorite books. I've gifted it to many people. And this poster was actually up in my house when I was growing up in my parents' bathroom. And I had memorized this passage.
Specifically on children?
Yes. It's a little weird, right? But
I'm loving it.
I remember sitting there my whole life thinking like that whole your children are not your children, and just like it passing through my brain and like what did it mean to me developing growing up, because I have a very tough relationship with my mom. And my identity being Korean, because she did not raise us in a Korean household. It was very, the Korean culture is something I've learned as an adult, and I've had to sort of struggle to find and figure out, because she just didn't do it. We didn't speak Korean. We didn't really eat that much Korean food. We didn't do any of the holidays. So It was very strange to grow up with this supposed identity and never have it.
Wow. Yeah. Very similar to so many third culture kids, transracial adoptees, transnational adoptees. Like, there's so many through lines of that experience of just feeling like deracinated from your culture.
Yeah. And I think that's what you address in your book that's so beautiful. And I'm going to like shout out to my FFA that I adopted through. So much of what you talked about, they did. And I think it's so important. And it's shocking to me that foster parents are not being taught this. Like, I remember in class 1, the first thing we did was an empathy worksheet where it was all about every loss that's experienced through adoption.
Wow.
And I remember you had to do role playing. What is the losses that you would feel? Why would you feel this way? How do we address this? And I remember them saying, there is a hole in their heart that is always going to exist from having to be adopted or being in foster
Wow.
care. And you will never heal that hole. Your goal in your life is to love them so that you can build up the space around the hole.
Wow.
But it will always exist. And I was like, people don't learn this?
No.
No.
And I was so shocked. And that's why I think your book is so valuable for anyone who wants to foster adopt, because coming into it with that knowledge, I felt was so empowering as a parent to understand my
Wow.
role.
That is really exciting to hear that that was your educational experience. That certainly is not all of the agencies.
Yeah,
But specifically around race, the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act prohibits agencies from mandating that parents learn about race and culture. It can only be like a an extra, like an extracurricular class, an option.
And
Wow.
that's just shameful. I know in another class, you talk about the Sonder sphere in this, which we'll dig into more. I thought it was fantastic. But we did a thing with M&Ms, and you had to put all these people in your life, what color M&M are they? And each, ethnicity was given a colored M&M. And it came down to like, who is your closest friends, the ones you rely on. And it's like the top 5 people in your life. And I only had one blue M&M, which stood for African Americans. And
Yeah.
it's my best friend that I saw. And she was like, listen, as your one blue M&M, I am not going to let you adopt. If you adopt African American children, I'm not going to let you adopt them and do whatever you want with them. Like, it's not happening.
Beautiful.
Like,
Beautiful. It's such a
which is
great way
great.
to like make that I'm your one black friend thing reality, because
Yeah.
there are so many people who feel that they have a very diverse friend group because maybe they
And they
want
don't.
that to be so, or they read a lot of books, or but
Hmm.
then to do an exercise like that where you actually have to make it like a reality to see what
Yeah.
your friend groups look like. I think that's so wise and brilliant, and great job to your one black friend for being like, nope, this isn't a safe
Yeah.
place for a black person to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And
and
it's,
can
Right.
I
it's,
just jump in here really quickly? Okay, 2 things. One, I'm still pissed that they got rid of the tan M&M. Sorry, blue M&M, but because it was replaced by the blue M&M. Are you old enough, Angela, to remember the tan M&M? Like, there used to be the dark brown M&M and then the tan M&M, and then they replaced it with a blue M&M, and I'm still mad about it because the tan one was actually my favorite M&M. Maybe because it was closest to my skin color. I don't know. Anyway, but also, I just wanted to just backpedal a little bit. We didn't really introduce Angela properly, and like people
that's
who
right.
are
I just
listening are
jumped
going
right
like,
in.
"What are they talking about?" Because they're like, "Who is this lady? What book are they
I
talking?"
love it.
If they haven't read your book, they don't know. So, you want to do like a quick, just give us, Angela, a quick rundown of your whole life story, and then we can jump back into talking
Okay,
about
quick
your book.
rundown of my whole life story. Sure.
Yes, thank you.
I I was placed in foster care in Tennessee when I was straight out of the hospital and was adopted about a year later to a white family in Washington state. And I grew up in a closed adoption, so I didn't know my birth parents. Had a really loving adoptive family. My parents adopted 8 of us, and all from foster care, different races. But the city I grew up in was predominantly white. And so when I was 21, I was legally allowed to search for my birth parents by getting my original birth certificate. So I did that at 21 and was kind of given the runaround and ultimately ended up finding my birth parents on my own. My birth mother had never told anyone that she had given birth to me or another child who we're still looking for. And then my birth father had no idea he had a child. So I just showed up, and he and I look exactly the same. We have this huge smile and the same skin tone. And so that was a shock for him to see basically himself in a younger woman form. And and all of this was documented in Closure, which is a documentary about my search for my birth parents. And that film was on Netflix and Hulu for a few years in 2014 through like 2018. And since then, I have met hundreds of adoptees and really decided to write this book because of how silenced so many adoptees were telling me that they felt. And many of these were adoptees who have loving upbringings, but they had always felt like if they said anything like what I would say, which was things like, I wish I never had to be adopted, but I love my adoptive parents, but I wish it never had to happen. Lots of these adoptees were like, my adoptive parents would be so hurt if I ever uttered words like that. And that felt really saddening to me. So I wanted to write this book where I blasted out this common phrase of, you should be grateful, this idea that if we weren't adopted, I would be suffering on the side of the road or dead or something, which just isn't true because we don't know what would have happened if I wasn't adopted. But trying to give voice to adoptees to be a little more honest and truthful and forthright. So I do it through a lot of stories that I have collected over the years as I've mentored so many adopted youth. And I love sharing little vignettes and stories from these youth because they just are straight to the point. Don't.
Yeah.
And so it's really refreshing. So I
Mhm.
think that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, just from that little snippet there, you kind of get a sense of what Angela's journey has been. I'm telling you, everybody listening, read this book. It is
Yeah.
her birth search story and journey is just amazing. And like, it is a page turner. You'll be like, oh, what's gonna happen next?
I
And
know. I
then like
know. Yeah.
and the conversations with the young people that you mentor and doing like in group talks and stuff, really just so eye-opening and so really wonderful to read. Okay, so perfect, that was exactly what we needed from you. Okay, great.
Now Heather's
I
gonna
know,
jump
I'm like,
back in
wait a
with her
minute,
craziness.
did we ever talk about who Angela is before we just dove into the stuff?
I'm so excited.
I know we are super excited about your book.
It's so good, and like there are things that you call out that are so that do exist to this day, and I think are so gross. Like you talked about a kid fest, which I went to one, and I was like, this feels so disgusting.
Okay, which we should
Um,
explain. Not many people know
yes,
about Kids Fest. So,
And I only know
Kids
what
yeah,
those are because I
Fest,
saw one like on a TV show once, like sort of
yeah.
represented, and I was like,
It's
ooh.
um,
it
it's
can be
actually
cringy. It's cringy, but it also sadly works.
I bet.
So,
yeah,
essentially, it's a place where kids who have been in foster care and are legally free to be adopted and aren't being adopted for whatever reason, which the reasons are often around kind of a misunderstanding perhaps of behavioral issues because the kids have been through so much, but
Right.
they're, quote, hard to place kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they all get together. Every state does it a little bit differently, but maybe they'll get together at a park and run around, and all these parents, prospective adoptive parents who are approved to adopt, will also go to this playground or park and then get to kind of watch these kids and maybe pick one out. Like,
yeah,
it's really cringy, but like truly the bottom line is that it actually works because when you have just a piece of paper that describes a child and usually describes the tough things, they have this behavior, they do, they kind of list out the hard things. It's hard to imagine that the kid is joyful, playful. So seeing them out on the
Mm-hmm.
playground, like
hmm
running around and on the swings,
In
helps
their natural
people
habitat.
yeah,
their natural
yeah,
habitat.
yeah. It just as a parent, we didn't pick any kids from that event, mainly because I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I was like, this feels so wrong. And you actually mentioned U.S. kids, U.S. adopt U.S. kids, I think .org, the website. That's actually where I found my kids in the end. They are an older adoptee set. They were 6, 8, and 9 when we got them, all biologically related. So their story, and this is just to tell you now, this is a book I think I want you to write too, because I feel you'll write it with the same vulnerability and honesty and looking from every angle. Children who do know their birth families have a very different experience than those who don't.
Yes.
And
Totally.
I actually felt like Nene related more to my kids' experiences than in some ways yours, because they knew their birth parents
I
and they knew.
totally hear this. And yes, for your
Yeah.
audience, Nene is my
Mhm.
biological sister who was never adopted, but also wasn't really parented by my birth mom.
Mhm.
But she grew up knowing her, knowing where she was. And so Nene had probably what you're describing, where it was this, and still has this very protective love for our birth mother, and a combination of understanding the difficulties and the troubles
Sure.
that our birth mother has. It's this complex and really awesome view, which I didn't have because growing up not knowing her, I had the ghost kingdom that I write about, where it's
Sure.
like I dreamt who my birth mother was, and that wasn't based on any reality because I didn't know, and so it was less nuanced. And so yeah, I think you're right that there is another book, because a lot of the work in my book is around adoptees who never had the opportunity to know our birth parents, and that is a very different experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Ghost Kingdom, because one of the things that I was so excited to see in your credits of work is that you consulted for what's the TV show? I just forgot the name of it now.
This is
With
us.
Sterling. This is Us, which I
Mhm.
watched every episode of, and I just forgot the name of it. For Sterling K. Brown's character, who, for those of you who didn't watch This Is Us, he is an African American man who is adopted into a white family and is one of the series regulars of the show. And there are 3 siblings, he and his 2 white siblings who are like twins. Anyway, we don't have to go into the details of this TV show, but that you consulted on that show, and that actually became part of his storyline later on, that he is in counseling and he talks about his ghost kingdom. And it's the first time I ever saw that talked about on TV. So yay, hats off to you. And the first time I've ever seen a transracial and just adoption story in general handled properly in a major show or movie. It's always the fantasy and the
Yeah.
let's reunite with the mother, and our mother has been longing for us and loves us and everything's perfect, and then you go off and live in a castle and wear a crown. Like, it was the first time I saw adoption realistically represented and appropriately represented. And I would just like to share with you now my ghost kingdom, because for years I had this and I didn't even know there was a term
Yes.
for it.
I am
And then
so
later I
curious.
learned it. Okay, so
Who
my, I
was your
think
birth
I've told
mom
this to
and who
Heather,
was your
because
birth dad?
not so much actual like mother and father, but when I was in elementary school, when I would be just so irritated with my family, my adoptive family, I used to fantasize that the cast of Three's Company adopted me. And I lived with them in San Diego, and they would take me to the Regal Beagle, and I lived in their apartment, and Larry was maybe my boyfriend.
Yep,
And I
of
just like hung out
course.
with them, and they really liked me for who I was, and I was like
Oh.
cool, and I didn't
Yes.
live in like a place where it snowed for like 9 months, and it was just awesome. My life was happy and awesome. That was my ghost kingdom for years when I
Oh.
was in elementary school. I mean, I thought, like, what a
Naturally.
perfect life. I could have been adopted into like a way better family or group of people, like the cast of Three's Company. Yeah, that was my ghost kingdom.
I love it. I love it. And again, to like define, I feel like your podcast is so fun and funny. You just jump into you 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 expect that your audience has done this work too, but
Yeah.
to help others understand, this ghost kingdom is like an imaginary fantasy world that adoptees go in to make sense of their story. And it actually isn't just adoptees. It's like any of us who perhaps
Sure.
like
Had
didn't
a crazy
we could have
mom.
gone to
Yeah.
college gay,
I've
but we went to college B instead, and we think in our head, gosh, if I went to college A, maybe I would have lived in this city and married this person and all of that. So that's like the ghost kingdom. But for adoptees, we might do it with birth family or adoptive family. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember what's so funny is when I read it, I thought about a conversation my daughter had with me when she was kind of new into the house. And I know it was also like a testing conversation, but she
Yeah.
said, I had a dream last night that my birth mom was married to my dad, to dad, meaning my husband, and you
Oh,
weren't there. And I was
yeah.
like, oh,
Oh,
that must have been a very interesting dream. How did you feel about it? Um, and for a while, she would often bring it up. Like, it would be, I think my life would be different if my birth mom was married to dad.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that would be different.
it sure would. Wow.
um, but you have to validate those feelings. And that was a big test of who I was going to be as a person and a parent, of like, you're going to have to hear things that hurt, but it's not
Yes.
about you. And you need to sit down and you need to listen and you need to try and figure out why they're hurting enough to say this. And it was a big challenge. Thankfully, all of my kids were in therapy almost immediately when we got them. So they gave us a lot of tools. I took a lot of parenting classes on how to parent. I did all the work, but it stung. Like, I'm not going to lie. It stung.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And this is why I
Doesn't
started
matter.
with Khalil Gibran's poem on children, was
Mhm.
because there was this difference between, parenting and having this ownership mentality of like,
Mhm.
I own these kids, and therefore
Yeah.
comments like that make it even harder to hear, versus having an open understanding of like, we are stewarding these children.
Yeah.
When you have that outlook, it's perhaps a little more understandable to try to figure out like what your daughter's actually trying to say
Yeah.
and talking about.
Yeah, I mean, definitely those moments, you have those kind of like stinging moments as a biological mom as well. I have one 16-year-old daughter and we're very, very close. But I mean, all kids say things to parents that like are hurtful sometimes. And even just going back to the poem that we keep referencing, that theme of like that we don't own our children, and that years ago when I first moved to LA, I was in a short film, and the woman who wrote it had just had a baby, and she brought her baby to set one day, and this was way, way before I had a kid. So I was just like, "Oh, your baby's so cute. Blah, blah, blah. How's it being a mom? Blah blah blah." And I asked her something about being a mom, and I remember she was the first person who kind of shared that sort of mentality with me, and she said, "You know what, I'm just his host here on this planet. I don't own him.
Mm,
I'm not the boss of him." She's
Mhm.
like, "So I'm
wow.
here
Yeah.
to be here for him." And I that always stuck with me, and I
I
keep
love that.
referencing back to that moment as a parent whenever I have those moments of like, oh gosh, like where you feel like, okay, I'm gonna take control of this, or I'm gonna be the boss, or I'm mom because I
Yeah.
say so and that's why, or whatever. Like, that never works. Like saying like, because I say so and that's the reason why.
I think it's especially tricky for adoptive parents who adopt
Mhm.
for reasons related to infertility, because
Yes.
there sometimes is an aspect of how they haven't grieved the child that they really wanted and wished they could have had
Yeah. Yeah.
biologically. And so then they
Yes.
adopt a child and really, maybe subconsciously, are really hoping that the child does reflect them and act like them and all of these things. And so when that doesn't happen, it's it can be it can come across as that ownership piece,
Yes.
instead of understanding they came from somewhere else. They have other
Yeah.
genes.
In your book, I do feel a little called out in a couple places, but I think that's fair and it's fine. When you talk about people who are like, we're adopting because we think it's what's right for this world. And that's literally when I was 10, I saw a program on orphans in Romania. And it was so baffling to me that there were children without parents. It had never crossed my mind that it existed on such a massive scale. And at 10, I was like, well, I'm going to adopt. That's what it's going to be. And my husband started dating me when he was 17 and I was 16. And I was like, hey, we're going to adopt when we get married. And he's like, okay. And so that just
Wow.
was the way I had always decided to build a family. But I do feel silly when I tell people, like, yeah, I adopted because I thought it was what was right, the right thing to do. Uh, and there are people who as Amy knows I'm a Christian, but I get really upset when
And
people
I'm
get on
not.
their Christian high horses and they're like, I adopted because God told me to. And I'm like, okay, I guess maybe maybe it's other things. But yeah, I think it is important to address the reasons why are we choosing to adopt? Are we
It's so huge. I mean, I don't.
Mhm.
Okay, it's interesting to hear that you felt called out. I think that there is
Hey,
absolutely a
fair.
place, like you describe adopting siblings who are older,
Mhm.
which feels like there is a more clear need. When people
Mhm.
adopt a newborn, it's
Mhm.
often a permanent solution to a temporary problem
Yes.
for women who maybe can't parent their children at that moment. The need is more around providing them with resources rather than they neglecting, abusing, or not wanting their child. And that is a different story than sibling set who's been in foster care where there may be documented abuse or neglect. So hopefully I was clear about that in the book. There are
You
differences.
you were
International
you were
adoption as well.
You were. It just, but there is a little bit of like, when we would talk about the reason we wanted to adopt in these sessions, it's a little weird to say, like, I'm choosing adoption. And, you feel like, okay, so there is a thing, and maybe this is the title of your next book when people are like, you're such a hero. You're
Yes,
such a good
you're
person.
such a saint. Or for me,
I'm not.
my
Yeah.
adoptive mother's name is Teresa, and so
Oh
she is a
God.
white woman with all these kids. Yeah, everybody is
Yeah.
like Mother Teresa.
Oh
Yeah.
boy.
I can only imagine.
Oh
And
wow.
I'm going to tell you, it's a really icky feeling when people always tell you how great you must be to have adopted. And it's like, I didn't adopt to be a better person. It's just how I and my husband decided to build our family. It was the choice that we wanted. And I was never a fan of babies, so I never wanted a baby. And it really is just kind of a gross feeling. I'm just going to put it out there. I don't like being told I'm great or wonderful or this or that. It was hard. And I call it a 3-year hell. The first 3 years we had them, it was hard. We had a lot to unpack. I never go into
Yes.
detail about my kid's life, but it was severe. The trauma
Yeah.
and the abuse was severe. Um, Having to navigate that and learn to love children who don't want to be loved at that moment is really hard. And it's really hard to be in, and I can see why kids get put in those second rehomings. It's terrible, these, but you have to be willing to take a large brunt of abuse from children who have no idea how to handle it.
Yeah.
And it's not sainthood, it's, I don't know, it's masochism. That's what I
Yeah.
think it, like being willing to just be, yelled at, screamed at, hated on for a while because of what you represent in their life right now. You have to be willing to do it. And but at the end, like I always say, those 3 years were worth it. I would not change anything for the world. I think my kids are amazing. I love them to pieces. I think they're turning out into great human beings, who have like passions I never knew they even existed before.
Well, and that's
But
why I think so many people always say like, well, that's what we want a baby because they don't want
mhm,
all that like drama to deal with it. They think they're
yeah,
going to
No.
get this
Right.
fresh person that's going to be like moldable. But when you're an adoptee, of course, people often will come to you and say, like, oh, we're thinking of adopting. What do you think? And, I have to always be honest with people. I have to say, like, you need to take a really serious look into the why, really examine the
mhm,
whys, like as a couple, examine the why, and know that like this is a person who's coming to you with trauma no matter what age they are. And people don't realize that when you adopt a newborn or an infant. Just because you get a newborn baby doesn't mean it's going to be this perfect parenting situation. So, or if you give birth to that child, that it's going to be
absolutely.
easier, or this is going to be an easier child. There's no such thing as an easy child.
I think what was so powerful about your book, but very different from my situation.
Yeah.
But when you talk about towards the end, the kids in the adoption lounge, the way they refer to their different parents, and I noticed because you call you Deborah, either Deborah or your birth mom, My kids do not call their birth mom either. They call her by their first name or birth mom. And they've never referred to her as mom in my presence. And I said to them, it's okay. You can. And they said, we don't want to. And I was like, oh,
Okay.
I was like, okay,
I mean, when adoptees can make like conscious choices and decisions,
mhm.
I think that's just wonderful.
My kids all changed their names, which I know I was never planning to do. Like, I was like, we're going to use your names that you were given at birth. And my son's like, what if I want a different name?
Yeah,
And I said,
different
okay, do
story.
you want it? And I said, okay, do you want that? He goes, yeah, I do. And so he changed it immediately. And the girls followed the next few days. I did leave their birth name as a middle name because I'm like, look, if they decide they want to go back in the future, I want
It's
it to be a
still,
little easier,
yeah,
like it's there on their records, like it's part of their name. But yeah, every single one of them wanted like a fresh start.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's
It's just so much more understandable when you're adopted
mhm,
at an age where you understand what has happened to you. So
yeah,
much of my book deals with, I think, adoptees who are pre-verbal when their trauma occurs, or they speak a different language entirely because they're
sure.
international adopted.
So the question I would like to ask the both of you though is if you had been given the choice, would you have wanted the name Deborah had given you? And Amy, would you have wanted the name that your birth parents had given you to have been your name?
My birth
And I say this
mother,
as a person.
Deborah, didn't name me.
Mhm.
Um, I was named by a social worker from a Rolodex. And then my
Oh,
foster parents gave me a name, Jocelyn Kate. And they
Wow.
worked really hard and thought really deeply and really lovingly about this name. But when the advertisement for me went out across the country trying to find me a home, they used that name the social worker had stated.
mm,
And so I would love to have the name my foster parents gave me, and I have thought about that off
mm.
and on over my throughout my life.
Hmm. Wow.
I have a friend who changes her name as she said the seasons in her life changes. She's on her fourth name right now. And she's like,
Wow.
look, she's
Well, I
like,
mean,
your life has seasons. And when your season changes, so can your name. So if,
Wow.
you
well,
know,
like the current generation, my daughter's
mm,
generation, high school student now, they're all changing their names like every week. So there's one kid that is in the school play with her right now who this is the third name I've known this kid by in like 2 years. So I'm like, okay, whatever. I mean, they're not legally changing their names, not all of them. But I mean, as far as like for me, I mean, I did come over as an infant, and my name is Amy Sharon Anderson, and Sharon is after my aunt, my mom's brother's sister, and it's spelled with a Y instead of an O. And people are like, "Ooh, your parents trying to be cool." I'm like, "No, that's my old aunt's name. She's old." But here's one thing that I will say to adoptive parents out there, if you're listening, my mom used to my mom and I also not like a great relationship, and she passed away fairly recently, which is still like, I don't know, I'm still not sure how I feel about that, but she passed away just like around Thanksgiving time. But she was an adopted person herself. She was domestically adopted here in the United States. She was born
Wow.
in Minnesota and relinquished when she was a baby, and she is was old. She was just 85 when she just passed. So she lived here in the United States, was an orphan, an actual orphan, when we still had orphanages in the United States.
mm-hmm,
So she lived in an orphanage until she was a toddler. I think she was like 2.5 or 3 or something when her parents came to get her, and she remembers the day her parents came to pick her up. And she loved to tell
Wow.
me the story about how, oh, well, I remember when my parents came to get me. She's white, FYI, and they brought me a teddy bear, and they said, "There's a doll for you in the car if you want to come with us." Like she would joke about it as if
yeah,
she was
Oh my
bribed to get in the
goodness.
car with them.
yeah,
But I mean, clearly she wasn't bribed to go with them. But like, she loved to tell that story, like thinking it was funny, but like just because she could never really talk about her trauma.
yeah,
And she really, really, really projected her trauma and some self-hatred, and like also like some just issues of femininity and of her um just a lot of like shame, a lot of like body shame and stuff because of abuse and the way she was raised, and was raised in a very strict manner. And I think she was probably sexually abused by someone in her childhood. She hinted at it several times to me, but never brought herself to talk to me about it. And so she projected that onto me, like wholly, as the only child of 4 in my family. And so so back to my name being Amy Anderson, my mom always would make light of things because she never wanted to actually talk about anything directly. And she used to say, well, my name is like spelled the very traditional Amy, Amy, the simple spelling. And she said, well, we were going to name you Sally after your Aunt Sally, which can you even imagine?
Oh my God.
This as a Sally. I can't even. And that's like makes me think of the Swiss Miss Coco girl. Anyway, but like Sally needs blonde pigtails. So she goes, and we thought of different names. But we settled on Amy because we thought, oh well, it's easy to spell. She'll remember it. Like, what is that even supposed to mean? Like, did you think I was stupid right away, or that because I didn't speak English, she wanted to give me a 3? I was a baby. I was 5 months old. But that was like her joke. She used to say it all the time. Like, oh, we picked Amy because we thought, oh, it's easy for her to learn, or something like that. I'm like,
Yikes.
Yeah.
But I actually do really like my name. And there are a lot of Amy's born in the 70s. It was a very popular name in the 70s. So there are a lot of Amy's, but I like the spelling of my name. I like it. And for a long time, I wondered if I would ditch Anderson, like if I ever married a guy. And then I did marry a guy, married my college boyfriend, and he had a horrible last name. And I was like, I am not taking that name. I don't want to say his name because he's a real living person in the world and we don't have any contact now. But let's just say that it rhymed with anal, and I didn't want that name.
Yeah, I get you.
And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to stay with Anderson. But over the years, especially because I developed, I'm an actor and a comedian. And after I really started developing my own self-identity, I realized it's just such a part of who I am, of my uniqueness, of being an adoptee.
I think names are so powerful, though, biologically and even adopted. And I've seen a lot of people who, let's just say it, they whitewash their children by giving them very whitewashed names. And I'm going to tell you, as a person who's half Korean, growing up with the name Heather has sucked my entire life. My name is very white.
Tricky. Like, you don't want white people giving their kids like an ethnic name either. That also is cringy. And it's like, I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that if you have whatever your name was, if it's, I mean, I have trouble when people say a name is, quote, hard to pronounce, because that's actually a very like Eurocentric way of thinking. The names aren't inherently easy or hard. It's what language we are familiar with that makes something easy or
But I do think it's like, so like we let our kids change our names, and one of them has a name that my kids are Hispanic, first of all. And it's very funny because everybody's thought I was Hispanic my entire life. So most people assume they're actually biologically mine.
Wow.
And our favorite thing amongst all of us is to then tell people like, oh no, we're adopted, just to watch the reactions of like, wait, what do you, I don't know why it's funny, but we enjoy other people's misery.
Yes.
But my son picked a very Hispanic sounding name. One of my daughters picked a name that is very unique, but could be. And then the other one at the time wanted to be called Elsa because that was her favorite character from Frozen. And I said, no, I'm going to put the kibosh on this one. I'm not sending a Hispanic girl out in the world named Elsa. It's not doing it. We're like
let it go. Wah, wah.
Yeah, let it go. Yeah. Names are so important. And I was like, I didn't want to say no to everything, but that one I had to. And I feel it's important because my maiden name is very white. It's Heather Lee Dixon. And when people saw that name, they expected a white girl from the South to pop in. And then here's me. So when I got married, I did marry my husband, who is Romanian, because he had a cool last name. And I was like, I told him, if you divorce me, I'm keeping the name. It's like Tina Turner.
Because I love people never knowing how to pronounce or spell my name. I'm taking your name.
I am taking the most complicated last name ever. And it's just been so funny, and like my kids have really embraced it, and they love having this Romanian last name. Because people will be like, "Oh, your last name's so interesting. What is it?" They'll be like, "Romanian." They're like, "Oh, how'd you get it?" Like, "Well, it's my dad," and they'll never say anything.
How'd you get it? My dad.
And they'll look at them like, "Are you Romanian?" Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that's what Romanians look like. But I don't know. So for me, the transracial adoption experience has been a lot of fun with my kids because we kind of enjoy watching people process information of
Yeah.
like,
Well,
how
this
do
is
I
where
figure out
there
this
is a
family?
whole new genre yet to be really developed that is adoptee humor, like
Yes.
adoptee comedy. There is so much good fodder. And I know there's like,
Yeah.
I think of a couple Korean adoptees who are doing one woman plays that
Mhm.
are comedy, and it's just exciting. But I think books like mine, I hope, will help normalize being able to talk about adoption, that maybe can lead to some more creative ways to continue to talk about adoption, which includes this comedic part, because
Yeah.
it's interesting to watch people try to make sense of transracial adoptees. And when you
Hmm.
don't fill out the whole story for them, when you don't answer the quizzical look that they have on their face trying to make sense of us, there's
Mhm.
so much good ripe stuff that's also, of course, deeper. It gets to
Sure.
issues around colonialism, assimilation, and racism in our country, but also pretty fun and funny.
It
Yeah,
is.
for
I
sure.
think
I've been
it's
talking about adoption, my adoption specifically
Mhm.
in my stand up for, over 20 years. And at the time when I started, it was kind of unique. Like there were couple Asian comedians who people knew, like Margaret Cho, and there was a guy named Henry Cho. And there were a few, but like, I was the only adoptee at the time when I first kind of started who got onto TV
Mhm.
and was talking about it and stuff like that. And now we're like a dime a dozen now. There's so many Asian comedians and adoptees like doing stuff, which I love, that adoptees are starting to like really come to the forefront telling their own stories.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like one of my big
Yes.
missions right now, is to bring our voices, authentic voices, because like we were
Yes.
talking about earlier, the adoption story is just so used as a tool, a storytelling tool in such a inappropriate way most of the time in media. And so,
Yeah. Or used
we're
as virtue signaling, for
yes.
white
Mhm.
people to adopt
Mhm.
black and brown
Mm-hmm.
kids so that they can show that they aren't racist. And yeah,
Yeah.
there are so many aspects.
That's the one thing I always get accused of. Like, I didn't want to adopt just because, it's very hard. I'm just going to say, to find like a quarter Asian, three-quarter white children in foster care. Like, it was a very specific number to find kids that were similar to my husband and I. But we were actually rejected a number of times with other kids because there was a push, and there might still be in Southern California, to adopt Hispanic children with Hispanic families.
Mm-hmm.
I totally got it. It was heartbreaking for me. And this is where I have a problem with the system, but also realize that there's a need to train people as well as I feel I was trained. Um, we were given children that were considered hard to place. They were
Yes.
not said so in their ad, as you call it. Yeah. The ad actually was like, they're wonderful, they're this, they're that. And then once we got into the meeting, everything was started to reveal of like, well, there's things. Um, and you should be aware. And then they didn't even tell us everything because they didn't know. And all of that came out 6 months later from the kids. And I was like, whoa, there is way more. But there were behavioral issues that were making them hard to place together. So being a family willing to take all three, they were like, yeah, you take it, you deal with it. And I
Yeah.
think this is
Uh,
where there's a burden on a system that is overburdened, and it's really unfortunate, and I don't know how to fix it. And it's
Come on,
that this
Heather, fix
system,
it.
I know, but it's something that I see so glaring. Like
Yeah.
foster care, I feel so sorry for the counties and everything because they're overworked. They're completely overworked, and children get passed through immediately without further digging or looking to see if they can help the birth families or anything because it's just easier to push them through the system. And yet at the same time, the system is so overburdened with children that we're not making sure that the families who are coming through are appropriately trained and informed on how to handle children with maybe with issues or maybe just who are going to experience from the natural sense of loss. And I think your book answers so many of these questions. And I think that's why I love this book so much. And I think people who want to foster or who have fostered it would answer a lot of questions that people may have of why do I feel this way or why is this issue happening? Because I think this book does such a wonderful deep dive of the feelings of everyone involved. That's what I thought was so powerful. You really dig into how the adoptive parents feel and the adoptees and the birth parents, and you really try to come at it from all angles. And it is such a thorough look that I think it's like a must read for anyone. Like when people say, I want to foster, they're like, great, here's a book that you need to read before you start.
Thank you so much. I did try to absolutely extend empathy to all the players or many of the players, but
Hmm.
birth parents being one of them for sure, that
Yeah.
it's so common to feel such frustration about a child's behavior without thinking about their oftentimes it's generational trauma
Hmm.
from their biological parents who didn't learn how to parent either because maybe they weren't parented well,
Hmm.
and so there is so many pieces of this, which is why I end the book envisioning this new way, like talking about this Saundersphere, this word I made up, which really has to do with taking care of our communities, um,
Yes.
taking care of knowing your neighbor. Like it goes back as basic as that, that sometimes when we think about foster kids, think about your 3 kids that you adopted, we think they are like living somewhere else. They're else,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
we don't realize they are in our communities. They are
Yeah,
our
they're in
neighbors.
schools. They're here. Yeah,
They are
they're
in your
everywhere. Yeah.
schools. And so part of this, I think, is if we can recognize that and then hopefully build out from there to provide resources to those who perhaps don't know how to be strong
Hmm.
parents. And then we're going to stop this crazy pipeline of having 400,000 kids in foster care every
Yeah.
day in our country.
It's one of the things that I found so upsetting. And honestly, not try to be altruistic, but a reason we decided on older child adoption is when you
Yes.
look at the statistics for children over the age of 6 and their success into adulthood, it drops
Just goes
dramatically.
so down. I mean, so many of
Yeah.
after that age, they're really
Hmm.
likely to age out of foster care.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
Well,
which
and
is why
And
it's really hard in a lot of my work when I'm working with families who say, that they want to help by adopting, but are only open to adopting a newborn.
yeah.
And I work and I'm trying to be really careful with my language and my words. And then oftentimes they're going to say something like, well, we think we might adopt older kids, but maybe after we've done this first, after we've had our newborn. And many people don't kind of realize how painful and hurtful that is for me to hear.
Hmm. Because it sounds
There's
like a baby trade. Like I'll say it. Like it sounds like you just want a baby for the sake of a baby. You don't want a child.
in which case, let's call it something else because there
Hmm.
isn't a need there. There are
Yeah.
more people who want to adopt infants than there are infants
Hmm.
or unborn babies that are going to be available. There are children who need to be adopted right now.
you're not adopting a baby. You're adopting this is a human being who
Yeah.
becomes a child,
A
who becomes a
person. Yeah.
teenager, who becomes a young adult, who becomes an adult. You are raising a
And
human
perhaps
being.
adopting their family.
Yeah.
They come
Mm-hmm.
with, whether their birth parents are present or not, they come from someone else.
Yeah. And also, I just want to just quickly, because I know you have to go soon. We definitely want to just a big piggyback on what we're talking about of this being like a whole, like the sauna sphere, and it's a whole thing. It's not just like one. I'm going to adopt this one person. Let's talk about your adoptee mentorship program because I love that, and I mean, it's so that's the thing. Like me, is I'm 51. Like, whoa, I wish I'd had this when I was a kid.
Hmm.
Can you please tell us a little bit about your program?
Well, part of the cool thing about the Adoptee Mentoring Society is that it's all adoptee ages. And I start at age 12, but I am mentoring 50, 60, 70-year-old adoptees who are just having these conversations for the first time. And yeah, it's all ages starting at 12. And yeah, I found that after my documentary came out, I had somehow amassed like 150 adoptees that I was virtually mentoring over the following like 6 years after it came out. And the the desire was kind of similar all across the board, that adoptees just needed to talk with another adoptee who just got it and who wasn't pathologizing them or saying there's something wrong with them, but could just acknowledge and validate that truth. And so I found that there was this need for something different than a friend, but not a therapist. And it was mentorship. And so I, 2 years ago, incorporated it as a 501c3 and have had a incredible time training other adult adoptees to become mentors and just see the need. So now there's mentees across the world, and I'm just really excited. I think it has a lot of potential for growth. And one exciting kind of outcome has been adoptees who have tried therapy, but perhaps their therapists weren't adoption competent. They've been frustrated by that. Coming through mentorship, they've been able to identify what exactly they might want to work on in therapy versus just going in and being like, I don't know, something feels off. I don't feel a sense of belonging. Now they have some language, things like we've talked about, the primal wound or the ghost kingdom or ambiguous loss, and they can go to a therapist and be like, this is exactly what I need to work on, because they've gained this language and they've gained a community of others who are there to support them, adoptees, and understand that unique complexity of the loss that, like Heather said, is not going to get, that hole will never be filled. That is not cannot be the goal.
This is I'm very sad our time is coming to an end, because I feel like I could talk to you for hours on this. And I didn't even get to things like your piano playing and you have a crazy playlist of music that I was like, wow, this woman must have such varied taste musically. Like, it is so like when you mention all the different songs in here, I'm like, wow, I just want to talk about music with her. I want to do all these things. I hope we'll have you on again where we can just talk about like music and other things. This book was just so important and we really wanted to talk about it, but you have been so fantastic. But we do have a big question we ask all of our guests. So our podcast is called Casting Notice, and it's kind of a joke on the fact that Amy and I get really crappy casting notices usually to audition for.
Yes.
So somebody's making a movie about your life that's not the documentary. It's like a big star-studded film version of your life. Who do you want? Can be living, deceased, anything.
Any
but
gender,
who do you
any
want
race.
to play? Yeah, any race,
Just
any
go out
person.
there.
Who do you want to play you in that movie?
Yeah, okay, so since it's broad, I think it's Chimamanda Adichie. She's not an actress, but is someone that I would feel could imbue all of the deep, deep nuance. You know, Chimamanda Adichie, she is an author, Nigerian woman. She wrote the book Americana and We Should All Be Feminists. And her speaking, when she does public speeches, they are so profoundly filled with nuance, mainly around that code switching element. I think that's why I would love for her to play me, even though she's not an actress.
She could do it.
That's perfect.
I believe in it.
I love that.
Angela, again, make sure you follow Angela on Instagram, which is Angela Adoptee.
Angie Adoptee, yeah.
Angie Adoptee. And then she's got a podcast that
the Adoptee Next Door.
And everybody go out right now and buy at least 10 copies of You Should Be Grateful.
Thank you.
Spread them out through your Sonder sphere, because
good.
When you read it, you will have such a deeper appreciation for people who've been adopted and sort of where you should be thinking about people who've been adopted, you know, and it's such a great new viewpoint. And please write that other book. I think you could do such a fantastic job, especially with all the mentoring you do on older child adoption. I'm waiting for it. I've pre-ordered it. You haven't started it, but it's in my Amazon book cart right now.
I love it. Thank you so much, Heather and
Amy. If you're ever in
Amy.
Los Angeles or in Las Vegas, let us know. We're going to take you out for a Korean barbecue. And this has been just like so great getting to talk to you.
Yeah, you're fantastic.
So much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to Angela Tucker for being our guest today. We could have talked with her for hours. Please join us on the next Casting Notice. It's going to be a big episode where Heather and I tackle the subject of adoption.